And here we go. This should be way more comfortable than before. Hello there, friend. Welcome back to Max Answers Writing Advice Questions. As you can see, I've actually changed my setup a little bit. There's a little bit of less headspace, and I'm not sitting on the edge of my chair anymore. I literally used to sit on the edge of my chair, and it wasn't very comfortable because I would put a lot of pressure on my lower back, and it's just, not very nice. So after about a year of doing videos, I thought, you know what? Let's actually focus on the ergonomics. Man, I used to teach ergonomics back at the office, so I feel pretty silly for not following my own advice. But so that's out of the way. Yes, the setup is different. It don't matter. You know, you're seeing more of me if you wanted any of that, I guess. But still, that's out of the way. What are we talking about today? Today we're going to be talking about unreliable narrators. What are they, how do they work, and how you can make the best of them. But before I go anywhere, allow me to give you the formal disclaimer, as always, and remind you that the following is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a silly person who just realized that they're so short, they can't touch the floor on this stool. Okay, I can't touch it, but I have to be stretching out, and that just feels awkward. It's just... I'm not that short. I'm like average size. Maybe this stool is too tall. Remember, people, usually, maybe always, the problem is not you. The problem is everyone else. Like this stool. Silliness out of the way. What is an unreliable narrator? An unreliable narrator is a narrator in a story, primarily, usually a story told from first person, who has shown through the process of the story that they should probably maybe not be trusted, either by the fact of blowing things out of proportion or even just completely fabricating events. The reader gets this eerie feeling that maybe what they're being told is not exactly the truth. What is a good example of this? Well, a really famous example of this, and the first one that comes to mind for me at least, is the protagonist, the focus point to Vladimir Nabokov's great story, Lolita. Yes, I've actually read the book. I didn't just read the cliff notes. I'm not a hipster. I totally read books, guys. Totally. You haven't even heard of them, though. Puts shades on. Anyhow, there are a couple of points in that story where, I as the reader, I was sitting there, I'm like, did this actually happen, or are you blowing this out of proportion? And I think that element of feeling as though you can't trust the narrator added a little bit to it, because it made me judge what was going on, and it made me reflect on what I had read before. Because the protagonist in that story didn't start out being unreliable. He became incredibly unreliable later on, which made me wonder what I had been reading, and if anything, it made me more engaged in the story. Now that I think about it, I guess that is actually one of the main points of the unreliable narrator, is that they demand a greater engagement from the reader, because the reader is put in the situation where if they're noticing the seams in their lies, or maybe they're not lies, maybe they're pretend lies, but anyhow, if they find the seams within their narration that don't quite match, the reader becomes way more interested. And at least I know I would. I generally become really interested in stories with unreliable narrators because I start wondering and I start questioning things, and I'm like, is this real? Is this part of the imaginary world that this character is living in? Is everything we were experiencing a lie? What is real? What is not real? And suddenly you get this double meta inside of the story itself, where you're first engaged in the story itself, you know what it is, and then you're also engaged into this second layer of like, what is real? What is not real? What is a lie? What is not a lie? What did actually happen, in the summer of 1952? And what is a fabrication? Following on that trail of thought, by the way, I used to say train of thought, which I always thought was pretty funny because I know that thoughts can move people, but I never thought they could move you as fast as a locomotive. Anyway, why would you want to have an unreliable narrator in your story? I'm not gonna lie to you. I kind of feel personally that 99% of the unreliable narrators kind of just happen in your story. I think it's I don't think it's hard, I don't think it's impossible, but I think more often than not, a narrator becomes unreliable as you write the story and you realize, wow, this person may be lying, as opposed to you coming in, right in from the start, day one, this person is gonna be unreliable. I think that it's more one of those happy mistakes that just kind of happens as opposed to a plan. So aside from the fact that maybe one of your narrators will turn out to be a little bit unreliable, why would you want to have something like this? Well, I think, as I mentioned, that it makes the story a little bit more engaging, just a little bit more. I don't think that it just trumps a regular, usual narrator. I don't think so. I think it needs a particular story where it fits in. A story where you want to question what is going on. Like, I'm reflecting on understand that now, and I don't think that The Hunger Games would have been improved if Katniss had been an unreliable narrator. Like the only thing that would have come from that would have been that the reader would have thought that maybe the entire Hunger Games were just a dream, and maybe she was just imagining them to get over the intense nature of living in a dystopian society. But even then, like, that's begging a question that's not really important to the plot, you know what I'm saying? So, as always, remember, take what I'm going to tell you with a little bit of a grain of salt. I know that when I say that that an unreliable narrator is a little bit more engaging, it kind of feels like it just trumps a regular narrator. But again, different tools for different jobs. I don't think an unreliable narrator works in every story. I think it needs a very particular setup to be more engaging than normal. But anyhow, let's jump into the meat and potatoes of this video. My personal advice for making an unreliable narrator more effective and more fun. In my personal experience, I feel that the core of this advice, the very core that you need to focus on to make an unreliable narrator much more fun and engaging, is one very particular fun nugget of things that I just love in writing. What is this one thing that I love, this one particular nugget that just makes stories so much more fun to me, even when it has nothing to do with unreliable narrators? Bias. Character bias. In first-person stories, character bias to me makes it so much more engaging because it forces the reader to know this character's point of view, and through the act of understanding and translating the story, and in the movie theater of our mind, if you may, we are mildly forced to agree with them. Or maybe not be forced to agree with them, but have it so close to our noses that we may as well agree with what they have to say. And why is this important? Why is showing a character bias so fun for an unreliable narrator? Why? Because it becomes our reality. It becomes our perception of what is going on. If the narrator from the beginning tells you that this character X, let's call them character X is a horrible person, is a horrible, murderous, violent animal of a person who should not be trusted, who should not be looked at, who should be stayed away from. And the entire story you're told this. And what happens 2/3 into the book when you finally meet this person and they don't behave like that at all? What does that say? Isn't that a little odd? Because ironically, during this metaphorical story that I'm phrasing you, for 2/3 of the book we've been told, hammered into our head, the perception of a person. And while at first we may not have believed it, we have heard it for so long that we may as well accept it as truth. And when we meet the real person, the real character X, if you may, we see the contrast, we see the differences, and we realize the unreliableness of this narrator. There is something so very delicious about a character showing their particular point of view that is built entirely on their perception, their feelings, and the way they've gone about living their lives. Why is this interesting? Why is that fun? And I'll go into more in depth into the concept of bias in a moment. I know that I jumped directly into the metaphorical story, mostly because it was hella fun to tell, and I think it really built on the point. I think you get where I'm going with this. Showing a character bias, their particular point of view, the way that they look at the world, is very, very fun. And almost practically, it stands against the general way of telling stories. Because you assume there's this unspoken law in writing, particularly in stories that are first person, that much like third person, they are completely objective. Like, the first person narrator would never lie to you because they're telling you the story, they're telling it to you objectively, without lies, without tricks, without changes in the way the story was told. They're telling you the truth and just the facts, ma'am. And I think it's very interesting to inject a story with bias. I find myself that I do that regardless of whether I'm shooting for an unreliable narrator or not. I enjoy stories in first person that have that little bit of character taste, a little bit of character flavor, their personal bias that shows how they feel about the world, and even if it may be correct or not, even if character X is actually just a normal person and they had one bad afternoon and it left this terrible impression on our character, even if that is not exactly objectively true, I think it's fun to show a character's point of view. I think it's very human and it feels very real to have this juxtaposition of between what the truth is and what this character thinks, or even better, what one character thinks and another character thinks. I think that right there can be the root of lots and lots of delicious character drama. So, allow me to step away from the narrative. I'm basically fangirling about how much I love character drama and characters who show their bias, and step into a little bit more formal advice. What are we trying to achieve with an unreliable narrator? create a juxtaposition to make the reader question what is going on. Ultimately, as I mentioned in the past, there's no point in leaving clues if you don't want people to find clues. You want people to maybe not solve the mystery right away, but think about the mystery. Think about it when they close the book to take a break, or close the book, or when they're at school. Think about what is going on in the story, so they're even more interested in coming back. Ultimately, that is part of our goal. So how can we go about making this much more effective? This is something that you can totally, absolutely focus on as you're writing the story from the beginning. I don't think it's something you have to worry about until revision. I think it can feel very natural to start a story and having little moments where the protagonist, in their first person point of view, shares their opinion about something. They hate one type of music, they hate one scene, they hate something, or they love something, and they share their particular point of view and even try to justify it, or they don't, or maybe they don't, or maybe they actually don't justify it at all. That is one of those really fun elements about people in general. Some people justify their opinions, and others just don't. They have internalized how they feel about something so closely to their persona, if you may, that they find no need to justify. Why would they? This is wrong, this is right. That's bad, that's good. Can't you see it? I can clearly see it. I'm the narrator of the story. And the reader, through the act of reading, Max said, realizing they had mildly screwed up the cool line they were about to say. Whether it is right or wrong, objectively right or wrong, the reader is being forced, almost, if you may, strapped to a chair, almost literally strapped to a chair and forced to witness the story through this character's point of view. And at first, they may oppose to it, they may try to fight it, and they may question everything, but in time, given a little bit of time, the reader will adapt to this point of view and accept it as truth. And then I think you have the perfect position to start springing traps, to start setting up things so that the reader starts realizing, wait a minute, could it be that my perception, the perception that I got used to during the course of this story, is erroneous, is wrong? It is not as though I expected it to be. I think I may have drawn myself away, dragged myself out of the conversation through my metaphorical imaginings. I love sharing my crazy stories, so I hope you don't particularly mind it. Anyhow, let's dive right back, let's focus, let's centralize our thoughts together, you and I, and focus on what I wanted to relay with this point of view. What is an unreliable narrator? An unreliable narrator is one that has proven through the act of the narration that they should not be trusted, or that maybe what they're saying is not entirely true. Why would you want a character like this? Well, if you would like the reader to be a little bit more engaged in a story that calls for the questioning of the plot, an unreliable narrator is a great way to go about doing things. And how can you set up the reader, prepare, if you may, start setting up the traps from the beginning so that later on they could spring all over your readers' faces, showing character bias, sprinkling it. It doesn't have to be something crazy from the beginning, like this character believes this thing that is clearly impossible. Just showing opinion, as you may. Start lacing the story with the way this character feels about the world, so the reader themselves adapts their vision, if you may. They adapt their vision, their own mind, to this character's way of telling the story, of showing the world. And through the course of the story, once the reader has adapted to this, start twisting things. It starts showing that this perception that they accepted as true may not entirely be so. Again, that demands for a little bit of commitment and a little bit of time. And that's generally the rule with stories that have twists to them and a lot of twists and turns along the way. You can't have those from page one. You can't have those right from the get-go. You gotta be weaving in and out and have a lot of patience. As I've mentioned a couple of times in the past, much like stealth, much like being the perfect assassin, writing a good twist, a good plot twist requires a lot of patience, a lot of planning, and a lot of just waiting for the right chance to strike. Don't be hasty. Don't jump in right away. Give it time. Remember, as always, revision is your friend, and while it may not be present in the first draft, you can always go back and fix your narrator, make it as unreliable as you want to, and bring out the elements that you want the story to have. Simple as that. Remember, as always, revision is your friend. But that about covers how I feel. Sorry if this video was a little bit more casual than usual. It's been a little while since I recorded, and I wanted to get used to this new recording setup, so I hope that you don't mind. Anyhow, as always, I want to remind you that if you would like to send me your own writing questions, this question was sent in to me through Twitter by one of my longtime followers, Lindsay. So, thank you for sending the question, Lindsay. I love talking about unreliable narrators and just writing techniques in general. Please don't mind the machine overlords outside my window. Anyhow, with stealing us out of the way, leave your questions in the comments below or tweet at me at Mr. Kirin. And as always, I want to thank you for watching, thank you for spending a little bit of your time with me, and I'll be seeing you soon. I, for one, welcome our machine overlords.